on the Blue Dove. Can you see that? Is it working? So let me move these things around for a second here. And just give me half a second. Okay. Great. And great. How's that? A little better? I'm going to close down my Zoom on here, so just a sec, okay? And let me reopen it back on this computer, just so that we're all able to communicate. And we're definitely picking up some people, so that's good. Hi, everyone who's on. Your viewers request you to join in your broadcast, yes. Definitely see some people joining, which is great. So just 1 second here. I'm going to go back into Zoom. And okay. How we doing? So a mild delay. Justin, can you hear me from where you are? Because maybe what you could do, Justin, is join us on the live video, because I'm on the Blue Dove page, and you can post your questions even in the chat. Is that working? Everyone who's on, it's kind of one way right now, meaning I can talk and you have to hear me, kind of like on the high holidays, but you don't get much chance to talk back right now. So I want to apologize to you. We're having 30 seconds of technical difficulties, but they're all going to manage themselves out momentarily. Great. So Justin, I can see you on my second computer, which is my Zoom computer, and I'm going to open up the chat there, and you're going to pose some questions to me that I'm going to speak on behalf of you, and then I'll address them. Does that work for everybody? So just to introduce everyone, just so you know, we have Justin Milrad, who is here from the Blue Dove Foundation in Atlanta, and Gabby Spat, who's also from the Blue Dove Foundation. I connect with both of them through different portals that go back quite a long time, and I'm really excited to be with you. Most importantly, I hope that you, Justin, and you, Gabby, and your families are all safe. I want to give a very special shout out to Christina Buchert, who is from our temple, and just incredible when it comes to her abilities with technicalities and going the extra mile. She's just amazing. So I wanted to say thank you to you for all that you do for us, Christina. So May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and with everything that's going on in the world today, the timing is really important to discuss the topic of mental health and substance abuse. So we're going to begin with a couple of questions from the Blue Dove Foundation, a little bit of information about the Blue Dove Foundation, and then we'll get to some, back and forth and questions. So the Blue Dove Foundation was created to help address the issues of mental wellness and substance abuse that exists in the Jewish community and beyond the Jewish community. Based in Atlanta, the Blue Dove Foundation works with people and organizations across the United States and all over the world. Their key components are education, awareness, and outreach. And they encourage conversations and provide information and tools for individuals and families who are seeking guidance, support, and help. And I really want to encourage everyone, either when they're done with this program or at some other time, to visit www.thebluedovefoundation.org to see a list of their resources, their partners, and the services that they offer, because they're really doing God's work and holy work. And we're indebted to you, Justin, and to you, Gabby, and all of your team for the amazing stuff that you do. So thank you. It's really an important topic that just isn't addressed enough. So thank you. So let me just jump in by telling a little bit about myself. David Kirshner, 46 years old. I've been a congregational rabbi now for starting my 14th year, but been a rabbi next week, 20 years. I graduated 20 years ago next week. I'm married, I have great spouse and partner, 2 great kids. I live in Bergen County, New Jersey. But my life forever got changed in 1996 on July 17th. I was in Israel. I was leading a United Synagogue youth trip of around 70 high schoolers. Almost all of them were going into their senior year. And July 17th, 1996, for those of you who are really good at history and dates and remembering those kinds of things, a TWA Flight 800 went down in the Atlantic shortly after takeoff from JFK. And I was leading this trip with 4 other staff people. And we got a call from our office, and one of the people who I was working with, who's one of my dearest friends, went white and then jumped on the bus. And he said, there's been a tragedy. And we had assumed at that time that a parent of one of the kids who was on our trip was on that plane that went down. And while we're on the bus, I'm sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, how are we going to tell a kid that they lost their parent, they lost a loved one in this terrible way? And we got to the place where we were supposed to stop, which was clearly orchestrated. I didn't know about it. And we had to go make a phone call. And my friend Aaron said to me, let's go make a phone call. And I'm like, oh, okay. I thought he wanted me there for moral support. And we got to the payphone, and he said, okay, we need to call. And I go, where are we calling? He goes, you're calling home. And the first thing that went through my head was, I don't have anyone who would have been flying a TWA Flight 800. And then, it's hard to crystallize, but I remember thinking like, oh God, maybe something happened to one of my parents. So in my head, what I had thought was, whoever answers the phone when I call home, and I was in rabbinical school at this time, I was in my 20s, whoever answers the phone, the other person died. So if my mother answers the phone, my father died. If my father answers the phone, my mother died. And I was just prepared for this reality, and it happened very quickly and very slowly at the very same time. I call, the phone rings once, and both my mother and my father answered the phone at the same time. They both picked up a phone, which stymied me because that didn't go with my plan. And I could hear they were crying, and I said, what's wrong? And they said, you have to come home from Israel. I said, okay. I didn't ask any questions. I said, okay, what happened? And the first thing they said was, Gabriel committed suicide. Gabriel was my oldest brother, 13 years older than I am. He was the godfather for me. He was the Sandik at my bris. He helped raise me, changed my diapers. He was a very influential character in my life. And it was just the first things they said. They didn't say he died. They didn't say, we'll tell you later. He just said Gabriel committed suicide. He died by suicide. They didn't say he died by suicide. They said he committed suicide. And I went into this just moment of shock. And I think I stayed in that shock for a good 2 to 5 years. Went through many different phases of what that shock was like. A lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot of curiosity, a lot of confusion. I just didn't understand much of what was going on. So I got on a plane. A few hours later, I flew home. God works in very mysterious ways. I was sitting on the top of a jumbo jet, which had, these coach seats, and I was like in the corner, and I was going through these fits of sleeping for a half hour, then waking up and crying, and sleeping and waking up and crying. And the people sitting next to me knew that something was up, but they were afraid to engage with me, which I don't blame them. And then about an hour before we landed, they said to me, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, I just got news that my brother had died, and I'm going home for his funeral." And they started to cry, and they told me that they had lost a child a few years earlier. And we didn't talk about the circumstances, but they were very supportive. They told me something that was really important. They said, "Whatever you do, when you get to the funeral or the cemetery, make sure that you tape record everything that's said." And I thought it was like the strangest suggestion ever made. Tape record everything that was said. They said, "Yeah." And I did, because in those times, you're not really thinking on all cylinders. I just listened to what they were doing. And what they said was, none of your brain is working right now, and it's going to take a long time till it starts working again. And when it does start working again, you're going to want to hear what people said in memory of your brother. You're going to want to hear what you said. And my brother died married, and he had a 2.5-year-old little girl. And she wasn't going to be able to remember him. And having these details, I apologize, my dog sees something special outside. Having these details and having them captured was really important. So that's just a little bit about that news and how that moment forever shaped my life. One other thing that was of interest. My family was a very private family. My father never, and I repeat never, with a capital N, never ever shared data, especially like about his age or his health or anything else going around. So the idea that my parents would openly say to anyone who asked that my brother died of suicide was really kind of foreign, but they did. They, for lack of another phrase, they embraced it. Now, my brother Gabe had dealt with serious issues of mental wellness, and it had been a challenge for him for most of his life. And we had done a lot of forensics and backup and, trying to figure out, well, what caused that mental unwellness and what was it? And I was working under the impression that, wow, if we could just find out what it's from, how it came to be, what caused that mental unwellness, that maybe we could get to the bottom of this. Well, we did, in some ways, we absolutely found out what caused this, what stoked this, but at the very same time, it didn't solve any of the questions, the issues, the pain, the upset, the void that was there. Mental wellness is as undiscerning as cancer. And what do I mean by that? It means that sometimes people who, never smoked a puff of anything their whole life can get lung cancer. And sometimes people who smoke their whole life can get lung cancer. And mental wellness works the same way. Sometimes there are all types of conditions and issues that can happen in someone's life, from issues of abuse, from issues of how they were raised, you name it, that can lead to mental instability. And then there are issues of people who have otherwise not encountered those things that can still lead to it. It could come from chemical or societal. And as a result of that, there are significant impacts that happen, and it's undiscerning. Right? And I think that one of our responsibilities is to put into that category. I'm rambling on for a little bit, so I'm going to stop. I'm going to let Justin pose the next question. And I see people here in the comments are welcome to pose questions as well, and I'm more than happy to address it. So Justin's questions just coming forward to me. There are quite a few of them, so I'm just going to take them one by one. So just one moment. So Justin is asking me, share a little bit more about Gabe and his advocacy work around mental health. So I'm going to share a little bit about what we have uncovered about Gabe. We found out after he died, through an article that I had read, Gabe had gone to a yeshiva for 2 years for when he was in 8th and 9th grade. This is the exact same time I was a baby, an infant, maybe 1 or 2 years old. And he came back forever changed from those experiences. We couldn't quite put our finger on what changed, but he was forever changed. He never talked about it, but he was a different person. He was a person who couldn't hug. He couldn't show emotion. He laughed at his own jokes. He marched to his own beat. Incredibly bright, witty, thoughtful, but very awkward. And he just could not be physically emotive. So our family is a close-knit family. We could hug, we could touch, we could cuddle. He was never that way. And he had a hard time expressing his emotions. He could do it a little bit in writing, but he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it in a verbal way or in a physical way. And he was just different. There were things that were very hard for him. I can count on one hand how many times he gave me a kiss. I can count on, one hand how many times my other brothers or parents gave me a kiss in a day. So they were very impactful. What we found out later was that there was a horrible person who, it's hard to give him the title rabbi, who was a monster, who abused hundreds and hundreds of kids at that yeshiva, which was it was a boarding yeshiva. You stayed there overnight, and we're confident from different testimonies from other people who knew Gabe that Gabe was one of his victims. And there are others who have taken their life, sadly, who were the victim of this horrible monster of a human being. Upon finding that, there was no relief. You would think, oh, here's the reason. We found the puzzle piece. This is what caused and stirred it. Doesn't matter. He still struggled with mental unwellness. We still didn't know so many other pieces about it. And so what if that was the cause? It doesn't bring him back. It doesn't make anything easier to digest. And all of us have different factors that can lead to the struggle that we have in dealing with mental wellness. After he died, I was the only one of my siblings at that time. He was married. My 2 other brothers were married. I was single. I had no obligation. So I spent a lot of time nursing my parents back to health. Now, at that time, my mother really doubled down her efforts as an advocate for those who are what's called SOS, survivors of suicide. In particular, she worked with a lot of parents who had lost children to suicide. My father, for all intents and purposes, had died. He was alive, his heart was beating, he breathed, he could go from place to place and do thing to thing, but he was dead inside. His body died 15 years later. And they just had 2 totally different responses to it, and they were riddled with upset, anger, guilt, as one could only understand. I remember shortly after my daughter was born, I think I articulated this to my brother, but never to my mother, that I don't understand how my parents woke up every day. You fall so deeply in love with your children, and God forbid losing any child under any circumstances is just beyond description. And I just don't know how they continue to do that. So I definitely understand my mother using her energy for advocacy, and I understand, sadly, my father, who just couldn't muster up any energy, in the wake of this. So ever since this time, I have been very dialed in and tuned in to issues of mental wellness, and in particular, people who die of suicide. And I would take it, one step further and say that you become more aware of things when you have it and your radar is up for it. So I'll give you the stupidest, most random example. So Gabby, who works for Blue Dove, we were talking earlier today and earlier this week. She's on Peloton, I'm on Peloton. You're like, oh, you're on Peloton. And then you find out, okay, we're cross-fertilizing because we're both on Peloton, right? But 3 months ago, when I didn't have a Peloton, I didn't care who had a Peloton. It was absolutely irrelevant to me. But once your radar goes up to it because it's in your world, you start to see how many more people are affected, engaged, or survivors of suicide. And that's exactly what happened to my family. So many people who now were part of a common fraternity and spoke a common language. So we became strong advocates, and my particular angle of advocacy was, and still is, in destigmatizing mental wellness. My big issue is that if we still whisper the names of diseases that people can have from mental unwellness, if we don't treat it the way we would treat cancer or a broken leg or a car accident, then we are furthering the problem and not offering a solution. So the example that I gave in my synagogue, and by the way, my very first year of being the rabbi at my synagogue, which was almost 14 years ago, my first sermon was about Gabe and mental wellness. And my point that I tried to get across was that were someone in our synagogue, God forbid, and this is definitely the case, diagnosed with breast cancer, it would take about 3 hours until we would have an army of people, amazing people, that would put together a food train for our synagogue. They would put together people to sit and keep company with the patient while they were getting their chemo or radiation. We would have people who would be offering to pick up and drive for carpool and for afternoon activities, all these things that are regular. But my question is, if someone in our synagogue was diagnosed with OCD or with severe depression, and the OCD was so severe that they couldn't get the right cadence of steps to get out the door, would we talk about it? Would we share it? Would we bring it to the next person? And in doing so, would we bring a sense of destigmatization? My answer at that time, sadly, was no, and I wanted to change it to yes. I think we've moved the needle, but not enough. And I think we need to talk about mental wellness and mental illness in particular, and the same diseases without whispers, and treating them the exact same way we would with cancers, car accidents, and broken bones. It's our responsibility, and I think it helps with the destigmatization. So I see some more questions that are here. A question from Eliza. Why do you think Jewish people are so guarded about talking about mental health and substance abuse? Also, what about Judaism can give us strength to overcome our struggles? Great question. So first of all, I think that question comes from a bubble, and I don't mean that in any negative way. But most people who ask that question live in the bubble of the Jewish world. But if you get outside of the Jewish world, there is just as much of a hesitancy to talk about suicide and to talk about mental wellness. Most times people whisper the word suicide, and they whisper the word depression. They do not say it aloud. So it is not unique to the Jewish world. I think it is unique to the whole world. But we see it through the lens of the Jewish world more often, and as a result of that, that's how we end up talking about it. So that's number one, okay? Number two is, for better or for worse, when it comes, let's say, the high holidays, I'm looking forward to a time when we can have a lot of traffic again. I'm sure all of you are. People are judgy. Did you see what she was wearing? Did you see what he was doing? Did you see what he said? Did you see what she said? Can you believe that happened? We live in a judgy society. That's part of the nature of our society that we live in. And sadly, we still judge people based on issues that they're dealing with when it comes to mental stability. And we shouldn't. We shouldn't judge someone because they're dealing with depression. We shouldn't look at them differently because they have any other sign or diagnosis or DSM of mental unwellness. In fact, we should be putting as much energy into someone's mental wellness as we put into their physical wellness. So one other area that I put a lot of energy on, Eliza, at our synagogue is that, going back to Peloton for a second, we have people in our synagogue who are absolute beasts on these machines. They can do, 5 million reps, and they can lift 4 trillion pounds, and they're in perfect shapes, and they do, triathlons, and they can eat whatever they want, and you can bounce quarters off any part of their body. They're in perfect shape, okay? But that's physical. What kind of mental shape are they in? Are they putting the same energy into their own self-care? Are they afraid to go into a sense of therapy and talking about issues and feelings and things that are important? Because that is really important in advocacy. Because if you need your physical strength and you don't take care of it, your muscles will atrophy. But if you need your mental wellness and you don't take care of it, it will atrophy also. So one piece of advocacy that is really important is to look after your mental wellness, and don't be internally stigmatized about looking after therapy, taking medicines that are prescribed properly, and looking after your own health and wellness. As far as the issues of overcoming struggles with substance abuse, I have to tell you, I just am not an expert in that topic. There are many experts in that topic, especially people from Beit Tshuva, like Mark Borovitz and others who are great leaders. It's just not my sweet spot, so I don't want to take a gander into answering that. This is what I'll tell you in one sentence. I can never say anything in one sentence, but if I were to try and say something in one sentence, I would say that Judaism tells us that mental wellness is as important as physical wellness. We have been saying a prayer in the Misha Berach for years upon years, generations upon generations, hundreds of years. We have asked for healing from God. And when we ask for healing in front of the Torah, whether it's in our prayers, whether it's on a Shabbat, whether people rise, they close their eyes, whether it's in Debbie Friedman's song that many are familiar with, we say the words, Refuat HaNefesh, Refuat HaGuf, which means we need to have physical healing and emotional and mental healing. And we say that in English too. They are equally important. We don't ask for someone just to be well in body. They have to be well in sound in mind. That is a Jewish value. And if any of those parts are askew, it is equally important for us to put weight into making sure that they are strong and healthy. So Judaism says this unambiguously, as clearly as possible, that mental wellness is critically important. And I would advocate and argue that we need to be as mentally and emotionally strong as we do in being physically strong. That is our responsibility. I see another good question here from Mark. We are living in some uncertain times. The isolation alone is creating additional depression and anxiety. Yes. Do you have any suggestions of signs we should look out for in people who might be at high risk of harming themselves, or if they're thinking about it themselves, some things that they can do to address? I'm so glad, Mark, that you asked this question, because I have to tell you, and I'm going to be incredibly candid and raw with all of you, this has me up at night. This is what I call in Judaism the sweet spot of two things that compete with each other. So let me give you an absolutely benign case, and then we're going to bring it to a very serious case, which is Mark's question. In Judaism, we know that when someone dies, there's a responsibility for someone to sit with the body. It's called a shomer, so that the body should not be alone until it's buried. That's a big Jewish value. It's very important. We also know that a person is supposed to pray, an observant person is supposed to pray 3 times a day. We also know in Judaism that it's forbidden to pray in front of the dead. So now you have a case of someone whose job is to look after the dead, to stay with the dead. They also have a responsibility to pray, but they're not allowed to pray in front of the dead. So that means they have to make a critical choice. The critical choice is, do they not pray when they're supposed to pray because they're watching the dead, or do they leave the task of watching the dead and pray? This is a good conundrum. I think there was a movie about this a few years ago, not about praying in front of the dead, called Crimson Tide, which is about 2 competing orders and which one takes precedence. I think we are living in a time right now where there are 2 competing Jewish values that we are struggling with. And I'm looking at this strictly through the Jewish lens. One is every life matters. Whether you're 98 or 98 days old or 98 years old, it matters. And preserving those lives matter. So yes, self-isolation, looking after ourselves, quarantine, masks, all of these things are of critical importance, even at the expense of our economy, of our lifestyle, of everything we have. That is important. But just as every life is important, so is our emotional well-being. That's why we say refuat HaNefesh. And if putting our emotional well-being in peril is a result of this isolation, we now have 2 very competing notions with each other in Jewish law that are not jiving, right? Because by telling people we're going to put them in a precarious mental place, but in the other we're putting them in a precarious physical wellness place, these are 2 serious competing issues that I worry about very, very much. So Mark, it is a really important thing. I do think that there will be serious PTSD as a result of our quarantine and COVID-19. I think there's going to be serious PTSD as the amount of loss that most people haven't even begun to digest, because people who are dying are going to the hospital, they're staying there from anywhere from 2 days to 2 months, and then if they're dying, their family's not seeing them die, sometimes they're not even going to the burial, and there will be some post-traumatic stress when all of this, please God, is over very soon. In addition to that, there'll be stress for people who have had loss of a graduation, loss of a prom, loss of their senior year, loss of a bar mitzvah, a wedding, you name it. In addition to all of that, there are other factors that seem to address people's mental wellness. So at our synagogue, we have an army of people who make calls, especially to the homebound or people who can't get out of their houses because they have immunocompromised or because of their age. And what I noticed, especially at the beginning, is when it was a yucky day outside, when it was cold or rainy, everyone I spoke to was hyper depressed. They were sad. There was no skip in their step, no sense of optimism. When it was sunny and bright outside, totally different. They could sit by the window without going outside. They had a different feeling. We know that same thing happens when kids visit potential colleges. A brighter day has a better chance of them falling for the school that they will end up going to versus a school they could love, where if it's not such a nice day outside or one person looks at them askew, that visit goes very differently. So I think one thing to do is to keep in mind the climate. And the climate is not only the literal climate outside, but for example, the day that they announced in New York and then a few days later in New Jersey that school would be closed for the balance of the year, and my neighbor across the street has young kids, that had a profound effect for her, for us, for them, right? Meaning there are things that we have to be aware of that are deflating, and I think that those should heighten our sensitivities to this. I think we have to make sure that people have outlets and phone calls that they can make to people who give support. And I've said this, when I was working with Jen Ashton on this topic, we as rabbis, you as advocates, we are not miracle workers. We don't have capes. Our job is not to do CPR on someone who's suffering from mental unwellness or instability. Our job is to get them to the professional who can give them the CPR that they need. So don't think that you're going to have exactly the thing to say or put the burden upon you that only you can check in on that person and do what they need to do. Your job is to advocate for their wellness and to push them in the direction that they need so that they can get the support, the guidance, the medical care that they deserve and that they need. And I think that's really important. I think you have to listen to people's language. And if they're saying anything that's self-harming, anything of despair, you should be super aware. And then you're going to be put in the same conundrum we started with, which is, do you forego your physical safety to go check on their physical safety? Do you perhaps call a police officer to check on their safety? I'd rather always err on the side of safety more than anything else. And I think it's a really good question that you're asking, Mark. It's a really difficult place to be, and I'm very worried about this, these moments of deflation and ways that we can find words, optimism to buoy people's spirits. I think it's just absolutely critical. I see another question from Daniel. Historically, are there any stories from the Torah that stand out where an individual or the Jewish people struggled with mental health issues? Any intrinsic lessons there? Great question, Daniel. We have lots of cases. I believe, I want to say 9 or maybe it's 11. I had done the research on this, and I'm embarrassed to tell you I don't have it at my fingertips right now, of characters in the Bible who have committed suicide, who have died by suicide. One of the most famous being Saul. We also know people in the Bible who have dealt with issues of madness or instability. So yes, we do have cases in the Talmud in particular of people who just are not in a mentally well state, and how Judaism sees them, treats them, engages them as a whole. So yes, there's a very long, thick, and I would say robust codex, compendium on what Judaism has to say about people who struggle with mental health issues. What are the intrinsic lessons there? Intrinsically, it is ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Don't judge other people until you walk in their moccasins. I know that's not necessarily the Bible, that's Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird, but the same concept. And to always dan l'kav zchut, to always judge people as you would with a little bit of merit, understanding, a grain of salt, thoughtfulness. This is a Jewish value, and one that I think we need to take, extra precautions with, especially with all of the intensification that's happening now because of COVID-19. I see 2 questions from Mark in rabbinical school. Do you receive training in crisis intervention as part of pastoral type education? Is that something that would be additive to a holistic education as a religious leader? So, first of all, the curriculum at the rabbinical school that I went to has changed dramatically because as I started, I graduated 20 years ago. That was a long time ago. I know it's hard to tell because I look so incredibly young on camera, and I'm only 32. So you're probably wondering how that happened. But the curriculum has changed. So today, most rabbinical schools are spending a lot more time on the issue of pastoral care. And it is something they address. However, pastoral care there's not enough time being spent on mental wellness issues. So I will tell you that one of the rudest awakenings I had in my congregation was how much the issue of mental unwellness would manifest itself in the first few years of my rabbinate. See, before I became a congregational rabbi, I worked for a Jewish institution. And there I was basically in the corporate world, but working for a Jewish organization. Once I went to the synagogue world, everyone is dealing with something. And they vary on levels. So whatever training we did have, it wasn't nearly enough. And I would argue the more training you have, the more prepared you are for these things, the better leader you will be, the better pastor you will be, the better clergy person you will be. I don't think it's limited to rabbis whatsoever. I think it's for every, I think it's for every religious person. And I think it's just a great question that you asked, Mark. Kathy is asking the question, right now, we're in the age of COVID-19 and everything has changed. I agree. While there has been a lot of sadness, there are some happy and positive stories that have come out of community strength. Can you share a story or two that you have seen or heard that has brought great joy or happiness? I love that question, Kathy. I have to tell you, before I answer that question, we have a few people in our congregation who work for the news media and broadcast. And I said, could you imagine if we had a news that didn't tell us something of fear, and not talking about COVID, way before COVID, didn't start off the stories with fear, started off every story with a feel-good story, and in the middle there was a feel-good story, at the end there was a feel-good story, and in between we had the news. I think it would actually change the composite of the world. We share a lot of negative information. One time, if you want to do an interesting experiment, just go to any news website. I don't care if it's Fox, CNN, ABC, NBC, Univision, doesn't matter, and see how many of the stories, just the titles, evoke fear. How many of them are based on some sense of clickbait? I think that's a reason to worry. I'm going to share a story that is both sad and beautiful at the same time. And there are a lot of good stories, though. I'll share two. So the sad and beautiful one is this week I finally had a reprieve, but for the last 3 weeks I was doing a funeral and sometimes 2 or 3 funerals a day. Almost every case was COVID. And it was 6 days a week. I don't do funerals on Shabbat. And so many people were dying of COVID or COVID-like issues. And the idea of dying alone is just an unmitigated nightmare, especially for the family. And what I found out is that there were nurses and doctors and orderlies who were using their own phone at either their break time or time when they would otherwise be off duty. They'd work a 12-hour shift and they would stay for an hour and a half and hold up a phone, an iPhone, in front of the person who was at the end of their life so that family members could say goodbye to them. And when I heard these stories, I thought, yes, you are heroic workers for being on the front line. Yes, you are amazing for figuring out how to use ventilators and medicines and save lives and put yourselves in harm's way. But the idea that you would spend 2 hours of a person you've never met in your entire life and hold a phone steady so that their children and their spouse of 40 years could say goodbye, to me is an act that is more beautiful than description. It is so powerful, and it demonstrates to me the beauty in humanity. And I don't think that was only a humanity of a first responder. I think that was the humanity of a person who says this is life and this is what we value. And when I heard that story, yes, it was incredibly sad for people saying goodbye, but to think of the goodness that people were doing for others they didn't know, and that this was happening in bed after bed and case after case, was just something that gets me emotional. I think it's so gorgeous. I've also heard so many stories of people who have really connected during this time. How many people have gone to their neighbors or their friends that they don't usually check on, knock on the door and say, how are you? Do you need milk? Do you need eggs? Can I pick up medicine for you? I can go out. I can get these. You can't. How many families are having meals together 2 times a day, 3 times a day, 6, 7 days a week? It's an amazing thing. My own daughter said to me, she goes, she's in 10th grade. She goes, my life goes so fast. It was like things finally paused for a moment. School slowed down. I got time with my family. Like, this is a blessing. And I think there have been a lot of blessings along those lines, and perspective matters. One of the things we did at our synagogue before COVID is we wrote a message that went out to the community every week. Since COVID, we write a message every single day. One of the clergy writes a message that the synagogue gets every day. And we also give a message in our daily service that's live streamed, both on Shabbat and daily. And for me, I always give a message of hope, because I know there are people who are feeling hopeless, but we've got to give them hope. You've got to believe in tomorrow. Could you imagine if Anne Frank, stuck in that closet, didn't have hope? Could you imagine if people in Auschwitz didn't think that tomorrow would be better? Could you imagine if Golda Meir and David Ben-Gurion never believed in the state of Israel? There's a reason why the words Hatikva, the hope, are our national anthem. Hope is important, and we have to find those positive stories, those hopeful stories, and we have to share them one by one, person by person, because it does influence us. It does buoy us. We cannot keep sharing the negativity. We have to share the stories of hope. There has to be a balance of realism in there. I understand that. And that's a hard balance to make. But hope is eternal, and it is more contagious than COVID-19. I see two other questions here. How do you handle the challenge of holding the anxiety of others when you're anxious about the same things that they are, that they are dealing with? Great question. That comes from Elliot. I think you just have to do some separation. Any pastor, any clergy person has to make time to put their own oxygen mask on. But they can't only put their own oxygen mask on. So I can tell you unequivocally, I have been in therapy for a long time. And making sure that I still do teletherapy while I'm in quarantine has been really important for me. Making sure that I go for walks regularly has been really important for me. Being in regular communication with the people I love and care about, really important for me. Being engaged in my work and still feeling a sense of holiness in my work has been really important for me. Doing exercise has been really valuable for me, more so than I ever remember. For me, my spirit getting energy out. Doing things that I like doing that give me happiness. I like to cook. Has been very good for me. And being able to have those times to channel it allows me to then pivot to the people who are feeling anxious, to hear them, to absorb those feelings, to validate those feelings, and to then help them with perspective and with hope. So I think it's a really good question that you're asking, and it's a challenge for all pastors. And I would say that if you're ever in a place where you're feeling dark, you're feeling down, you don't feel that sense of hope, number one, for any of you who provide it, that's okay. That's a normal, healthy feelings. We're all allowed to have bad days. We're all allowed to feel down. There is so much going on around us, and so many people have done so amazingly well. Could you think how many of us could survive and thrive the way we have if they would have told us in February you're going to be locked in your house for 9 weeks? Could you imagine? And look how amazing we've done. So yeah, we're allowed to be down. We're allowed to have tough days. We're allowed to cry. We're allowed to feel yucky. That's normal. That's healthy. We're allowed to feel that as pastors, as people who give support, as people who offer wellness. And it's okay for people who feel those feelings. What we don't want to happen is to be stuck in those feelings. So just as important as how are we going to find our way out of those feelings as validating when we're in those feelings. And finding those stories, those examples, those moments that buoy us, that remind us of goodness, that remind us of ways we can offer goodness, and seeing blessing matters. Here's a random thing. My neighbor across the street, she's an amazing human being. She and her husband, they set up this sign at their door because they're like all of us, and they look forward every day to FedEx and UPS coming with some sense of life from the outside. And they put up this beautiful sign that their kids made, and they put a box of snacks for the UPS and FedEx people. And they said, these snacks are for you. We appreciate you. We love you. What a beautiful act. And every time they replenish those snacks, they feel good. Well, that's every time I think about them doing that, not only does it inspire me to do the same thing, I think about the goodness in the world. So these are the things that get us out of the negativity and bring us towards that positivity. I think that matters. Simon asked the question, can you talk about some resources that you are aware of that can help provide some more education and support for those who are suffering and their families? It's a great question. So the first thing I would tell you is the numbers of people who have dealt with issues of depression, of anxiety, of OCD, of any form of mental unwellness is astonishing. They're very, very high. And for me, this is for David, knowing that you're not alone matters. Because whenever you're in a dark place, whenever you feel like you're not a successful father, you're not a successful husband, you're not a successful professional, whatever it is, those things, you always feel very lonely in that place. And when you realize that others have those same feelings, there's a sense of validation and that you're not alone. You have support, you have help, you have background, you have people to back you up. So that matters a lot. The other thing is that, everyone has a different itch that needs to be scratched, and it gets scratched in different ways. So for some people, there are some self-help books that are really helpful. I happen to always turn to a rabbi by the name of Naomi Levy, and she wrote a book called Talking to God. And the best piece of advice she gave in that book was that she said, the prayers I wrote are from my heart, but you can write your own prayers. So for me, one of the things I do is I try and find a space where I can talk to God, and I do just that. I just pour from my heart. I also write. For me, to write things out that I don't share with anyone in the world, not another soul, very supportive, very helpful for me. So for me, that's a really, really important thing, a really good outlet. And the other thing that's very important is that there are so many people who have dedicated their careers to mental wellness and helping support those who are challenged. Don't be afraid to reach out to them. And if any of you can't find the address or the right person to go to, you can reach out to Justin, you can reach out to Gabby, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to the other clergy at our synagogue, you can reach out to your local clergy, you can reach out to anyone. There are so many people who are willing to support you and help you, and we will put you in touch with those right people. It will make all of the difference in the world. For a final question, I want to just talk for a moment about this incredible compilation, a book called Quieting the Silence that Blue Dove Foundation put out. And they asked if I would share in that book, and I did. I shared the story of my brother Gabe, of the circumstances of his death and the circumstances of his memory, and how we've worked to work on his memory. So one thing I want to encourage all of you to do is to go on Amazon when we're done with this and order the book, because it's really not a book of sadness. It's a book of hope. It's a book of stories of people who have had challenge and have overcome those challenges. And it's a book of strength. For me, I have tried to honor my brother's memory by ensuring that anyone else who's going through a similar challenge or pain or upset that he's going through, that we could put antenna up that I didn't even know existed when he was suffering. And we can help people by destigmatizing what they're going through, by talking to them, by being available, by giving them mental wellness, health, medicine, physicians, support of any and all kinds, to let them know that they're not alone. If you're not alone, you have someone to lean on. You have someone to support you. You have a shoulder to cry on. You have someone to wipe your tears and to give you reason to know that the sun will rise tomorrow. So for me, that's the greatest honor I can give to his memory. It's the greatest honor and gift I can give to his daughter, my niece. That's the greatest responsibility I have, not only for the way he died, but the way he lived. So I hope that, this contribution in Quieting the Silence, I hope that this piece that I did with Dr. Jen Ashton in Life After Suicide, and pieces that I've written about this as well, that they continue to honor, more importantly, not the way that Gabe died, but the way that Gabe lived, and all of you can do that as well. This is National Mental Illness Awareness Month. So I think it's important for all of you to be familiar with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, that all of us have the ability to help prevent suicide. The Lifeline provides 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, support that is confidential for people who are in distress. It offers prevention and crisis resources for anyone or anyone's loved ones that is in need. It also offers a lot of best practices for you and for professionals. The number is easy. It's 1-800-273-TALK, T-A-L-K. 1-800-273-TALK. Don't be afraid to dial. There's always going to be another person on the other line, and always someone to know that you're not alone and that they're here to hear you. I really want to thank again Justin. I want to thank Gabby. I want to thank Christina. I thank all of you for tuning in tonight. And I want to thank you for all that you're doing to buoy people's spirits, to check on them during this difficult time, and to let people know they're not alone. It's the greatest way that we can bring a destigmatization and quiet the silence around mental illness. Thank you all for being with us tonight.